So recently, the internet personality Pearl Davis had a debate of sorts with the Daily Wire commentator Michael Knowles. In it, they basically are airing the grievances of the red pill and the manosphere. The whole thing is 2 hours. I'm not going to review all that in this one video because that would be so long, no one would ever watch it. But in this video, we will be going through some of the highlights and analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of both positions. So let's dive right in.
Story, I want you to not interrupt me.
Okay.
Story. Can you please not?
Anytime. I would never interrupt a lady.
Okay. So I do interviews of men that have been divorced often. Okay. And there is a guy I interviewed, and he married a Christian woman. Okay. Good Christian woman, no kids, not overweight, no tattoos.
Checks all the boxes.
No glaring red flags. Okay. They have 2 children together. And what happened was one day he comes home. And when he comes home from work, the wife has filed a temporary restraining order on him. Women can get these just like that. He's kicked out of his house. No trial, no evidence, no nothing, okay? Now he has to wait, it's during COVID, so he has to wait a year and a half to even get to see his children, okay? And even fight for them. And by the time he gets to court, the mom's been in the kid's ear saying how terrible of a person he is, okay? Now they go to court and they say to him, well, you haven't been in the kid's life for a year and a half, even though she lied about the abuse and they figured that out in court. This man had, and I saw his court documents, text evidence that this woman was planning to do this to him. In the year, he still had to pay the mortgage on the house. He still had to pay child support in that year and a half period. Goes to court. Now, he doesn't get access to his children.
This is the sad reality of divorce that people on the TradCon side have sadly refused to acknowledge. 50% divorce rate, over 70% of the time it's initiated by women. On an individual level, there is no clear utility for a man to get married. It doesn't benefit him because this guy's story that Pearl's describing is like one of millions, if not tens of millions. But let's wait and see what Michael's response is.
He hasn't seen his kids in 2 years. Michael, they live a mile from him.
That's awful.
A mile from him. He's so stressed out, he loses his job. Because can you imagine going through that? And he's an average earner. He's not like, because I've interviewed men that make, I interviewed a guy from Texas. He spent $1.5 million on a divorce. He got his kids every other weekend. And these are real things. And Michael, the saddest thing that you see is a man. I've interviewed so many men that I would not be surprised if they committed suicide in the next year because the woman has completely ruined their reputation. She's called him an abuser, all of this stuff. So his friends, it's...
A big part of the strategy that women are advised to use by lawyers in these custody disputes is to accuse their former husbands of some sort of abuse.
Completely different with his friends. His kids think he's the bad guy. He's out of money, and he has to start over at 40, 45, 50 years old. And the men are 9 times more likely.
What do you mean start over?
Start over as in money. Like he has to start his life over. They're wrecked. They are wrecked in these. And the problem is in family court, it's not based on evidence. It is not. It is based on a balance of probabilities, meaning it is more likely that he did it than he didn't.
Yeah.
And women are not punished for falsely accusing men of abuse because they've changed the definition of abuse. And these are, even if it's 5% of men that this happens to, let's say out of 100, this happens to 5%, even in the Christian churches. I would never, if I got on a plane and there was, there was a 20% chance of I get to paradise and there's a 5% chance of it crashing, I'm not getting on.
Right.
And you have to understand, this is death to a lot of men. The idea that they can't see their kids that are a mile from them. They're sending them money. And Glenn, a guy he's one of the guys that happened to.
Yeah.
And he didn't, it's like a lot of these guys did everything that you guys say. And when you guys say get married young, a lot of these men don't know what they're signing up for. And you're not going to be there when their entire life falls apart. I interview them on the other side. And that's why when you just say, just find a good Christian girl and get married.
That's not exactly what
I'm paraphrasing.
But it's an important distinction.
That is, in essence, what the Daily Wire is telling men to do. Just go find a Christian woman and everything will be fine. The men on the Daily Wire are completely out of touch with the experience, the reality of being the average man in America. The reality of the matter is the overwhelming majority of women in this country are left-leaning, and women are really like de facto atheists at this point. Even many women in conservative areas of the country, you really talk to them about issues and stuff, and they're quite liberal, actually. The reason they vote red or whatever is because that's just what everyone else around them does. And unfortunately, many allegedly Christian women only identify this way because ethnically they are white evangelical Protestants. And they are perfectly willing to twist the word of God so they have to take no accountability for their actions. And if you're a female follower of mine who has watched this far into this video somehow, I'm not trying to dog you out. I'm just telling you what the situation is.
When you say, which is the minority, that's not the majority of women. We know that's not the majority of women that are praying every day, that are going to Latin Mass. You know, I'm Catholic. Most of the women I went to school with are not practicing now.
This whole trad-cath Latin Mass thing is really an online LARP for the most part. Gotta burst your bubbles there. I know I have some Catholic viewers, but I live in one of the most heavily Catholic states in the entire U.S., and I have not met any traditionalist Catholics just walking around. There's probably 3 churches in my entire state that even do a Latin Mass. I couldn't find the exact statistics offhand, but basically Catholics are like room temperature. So if you meet an individual Catholic, the likelihood that they will vote one way or the other, red or blue, is as likely as whatever race they are. So let's say that your average white person votes Republican, like 60-40, and then you meet a white Catholic, the likelihood that they vote Republican will be 60-40, while if you were to meet a white evangelical, the probability that they vote Republican would be like 80-20. And that would be just using voting patterns as a benchmark for conservatism, in quotes. We don't even know how conservative this person would even necessarily be beyond that, but let's continue.
So this is not the majority of women. And you know, I just don't think, I think sometimes you minimize the risk. You know, out of every 100 divorces, and I know we were going to go back and forth on the numbers, but just trust me that I'm not making this up. It's 30% are malicious. And by
I think
malicious,
they're all malicious, actually.
No, I don't say that. And I'm not anti.
Oh, okay. I think divorce is always malicious.
But when I
Pearl was out of her element here. She's dealing with Michael Knowles, who does this sort of thing professionally. Pearl is hypocritical in a lot of the things she says and does. You know, telling women to live a certain lifestyle and be a certain way, even though she doesn't really live this out in her own life. Though that still does not negate the validity of many of the points she raises in this debate with Michael Knowles, which Michael Knowles fails to address or respond to in a constructive way.
Say malicious. I mean alienating the child or the father from the kids, putting them on child support, alienating. So that's 30. That's around out of every 100 divorces, around 13.
Yeah.
So
again, I would say it's higher.
That's not. But that's not an insignificant number. Men, you know, I interviewed a guy, he spent $1.5 million on a divorce.
Yeah.
He gets to see his kids every other weekend.
It's awful.
It's awful. And that's why, you know, we could go back and forth about, you know, the numbers, but I've seen so many men on the brink of suicide and they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they didn't do anything wrong, but I agree. You know, the situation is just dreadful. We all do terrible things, and there, before the grace of God, go all of us, because we're all sinners. And you know, the fact that something went so terribly wrong in their marriage suggests that, well, there's no such thing as no-fault divorce, so there was fault somewhere. Mm-hmm. But we agree so broadly that I'm not exactly sure what we disagree about. Mm-hmm. We agree that the divorce court system is dreadful. We agree that the divorce laws are terrible. Mm-hmm. We agree that modern dating is challenging. But I guess...
So what I would say, to switch things, I think men shouldn't vote for either party. Because neither party is taking their issue seriously. I mean,
the issue of divorce.
Where is the mandatory DNA testing? You know, I mean, people differentiate
I would not
on
like
these
mandatory.
People that, well, around 5% of men, up to 30. I mean, it's disputed. I don't want to go back and forth all day, but a significant number of men are raising children that are not theirs. You know,
there's a line in I think it's the Odyssey of where the son of Odysseus says, "It's a wise man who knows his own father."
Nothing says in touch and current like a random Odyssey reference.
It's true. It's been true for a long time.
Okay, well, I I don't know what that has to,
Well, you raised the
but
question of paternity, and I'm saying this has been a longstanding trope in the Western tradition.
yeah.
Go back to the earliest days.
But my point is they're not taking men's issues seriously. I don't think either party is. So I think really if it was up to me, I would say men don't vote until one of the parties starts taking you seriously.
Sure.
I think the left should try to buy him. Not buy him, but like, if Biden came out tomorrow and said, "Hey, we're going to make divorce and family court more fair. We're going to we're going to do mandatory DNA tests." You might disagree with that.
I wouldn't
but
like that. I find that to be quite disrespectful to the institution of marriage.
Well, I think it's more disrespectful that women are lying to men about paternity.
This comment by Pearl was the big faux pas that you saw a lot of these tradcon or conservative media outlets posting about, going, "Oh, how dare Pearl suggest that mandatory DNA testing is a reasonable point of policy, bringing shame to a woman's honor. I never." Michael Knowles is on the Daily Wire roster in order to appeal to high-income white people. He's not even making this objection out of what I feel would be a reasonable basis, which would be, I don't want the government harvesting my DNA, although they've already been kind of doing that for 20 years, so it doesn't matter anyways. But rich white Republican voters who are detached from reality find the idea that married women aren't actually all that faithful to their husbands to be unfathomable, and apparently you're the bad guy if you even suggest that this could be the case. And it's not even like all actual married couples either. That's the kicker here.
I'm over here in the hospital, y'all, finna give birth to his child, and he over here questioning me, talking about, is this really his baby? Like, what are you talking about? Do you really think I'm sitting here have you up here at the hospital and everything with me just for nothing? Are you serious right now? What kind of baby dad does that right when we finna have this baby? Like, are you serious? You really gonna sit here and question the baby talking about, oh, can you get DNA test? No, you're not getting no DNA test after this. I'm not doing that. This is your child. If you don't believe it's your child, then you could go ahead and go. I don't need you up here. Because all you're doing is stressing me out.
We finna find out.
Yeah, we are finna find out. And that's so weird for you to even be saying that, though. Why would you even say that?
We finna find out.
You don't never want to claim your kids. Why you never claiming your kids?
We finna find out.
Like, I don't be doing none of that cheating stuff or none of that. What are you doing? Bro, like, I'm sick of that. And you know what? I'm not even gonna say nothing, bro, because I'm not getting no DNA test. So if he don't think it's his child, he just won't have a child. We don't really need you over here. He in here stressing me out. Like, look at me. I look a mess right now. And you over here doing all this extra stuff, stressing me out right now. Talking about you want DNA test. Okay. You gonna get a DNA test. You could really go ahead and go.
Actual figures vary from study to study, but at least from my experience, anecdotally, it feels like it's probably around like 1 in 10. It's not to the point where this suggestion by Pearl for mandatory DNA testing is just ridiculous and beyond the pale, as so many people want to pretend that it is. Off the top of my head, I can think of at least 3 men that I know in my personal life who are raising kids that aren't theirs, and to me that seems like a number that's not statistically insignificant.
And that's a real problem.
Sure. Yeah.
So
deceitful women, it's a problem throughout history.
right, and even if it's 2%, 1%, that's 1 out of every 100 guys. That's a real issue. And there's no penalty for women doing it, even though it's fraud.
In France, they'll still make you pay for and raise the kid, even if it's proven genetically that you're not related to it.
Sure.
And so until the right and the left start taking men seriously when it comes to their issues, I think men should bow out. But this is Pearl's world.
In Pearl's world,
yeah.
Again, so it's confusing because you say, I don't ever tell men what I think they ought to do, but you just said, I think men should bow out.
I think that would be a strategy, sorry.
Right, but you say the same kind of thing when you say, I think men ought to wait until the laws change before they get married.
Every man has to decide for himself.
You just told men what to do when it comes to voting.
This is a really stupid point for Michael Knowles to try and trip Pearl up on, especially when it doesn't address any of the issues at hand.
Every man has to decide for himself what he does in his personal life. I think a good
Other than voting?
strategy, I think a good strategy could be that men walk away until the laws change. I think
Okay.
it's fair. Like, I think that's a good strategy. There are other ones. Maybe you could come up with some. You guys are one of the largest, political media organizations.
Well,
But I think a better strategy for you guys would be to maybe start catering, to start, because I don't really think banning no-fault divorce would really change much. The culture
would
is
change
what
a
it is.
ton. When they
I-
introduced no-fault divorce in 1969, I think it was, in Canada,
Mhm.
the divorce rates shot up 500% within 2 years.
Mhm.
Ending no-fault divorce. First of all, no-fault divorce wasn't even recognized in liberal New York until 2010. That change alone, it wouldn't solve the problem, but it would go a long way towards
Yeah,
solving the
but
problem.
that generation, a lot of them were separated anyways.
Separation
So,
is one thing. Divorce is
yeah,
quite
but
another.
look,
Because that would
I would
mitigate
be
all the
for
problems
it.
you're describing.
I would be for it. I just don't see that getting passed anytime soon.
We are never going to resurrect a pro-marriage culture, which is something that a lot of tradcons have to understand and get used to. Being married to someone of the opposite sex will be abnormal, if not freakish, in the near to not so near future. If you thought our culture didn't respect the institution of marriage now, just wait until 2035. Michael Knowles is being smart by dipping his toes in the manosphere water here in order to stay relevant, but in the long run, aside from maybe a couple changes in policy regarding to what happens to men after getting married, I don't foresee a whole lot of change in policy regarding men's legal standing happening in this country. There will be a growing tradcon manosphere convergence in the near to not so near future if tradcons want to stay relevant at all. But I doubt they'll get a whole lot accomplished in terms of policy.
Right, I don't see any of these laws getting passed. That's why I'm
But
telling men
that's-
don't put off your life and put off having a family until the laws get passed.
Well, I think we would have a lot better chance of getting them passed if that was the number one issue you guys were talking about. If that was the number one issue.
It
that-
is. I don't think I'm exaggerating.
Okay.
It might be the number one issue I've talked about. I mean, I was just at CPAC, and I got in all sorts of trouble for saying that the way that people describe marriage these days is
Right.
wrong, and marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman
Right,
for the
but
good of.
you would agree it's not how it's practiced today.
It is
right?
how it's practiced by the people who have
Would you
reasonable marriages.
agree it's not how it's practiced today, not in the special religion, but by and large?
Again, when you say special
By-
religion, it seems to me you're trying to marginalize the Catholic faith or other faiths.
I'm Catholic.
I suppose, but I think you're marginalizing it anyway.
They are marginal, Michael. That's why we're in the situation we're in socially. A lot of people will tell you they're Christian just because. It's not because they meaningfully practice any part of the religion or believe any of it.
But religion is just a habit of virtue that inclines the will to give to God what He
Right.
deserves, right? So it's just kind of the way that one.
Sorry.
acts.
The reason I say that is because I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I don't think that exempts men from the risk of getting married. One girl I interviewed, she was from Latin Mass, like one of those communities, and she had horrible parental alienation. I mean, her mother, there's a whole book that it's called How to Destroy a Man, and it lays out the framework exactly for how women can legally destroy a man, take his assets, take his children, and ruin his reputation.
I wouldn't recommend
This is a
reading
step.
it. Yeah.
This is a step. No, I've read it. No, I mean, not for that, but it's like a step-by-step guide. And this mother did it, and this was in a Latin Mass, like Orthodox community, and that's why I say
Yeah, again, because of these terms are sort of ambiguous and,
Mm-hmm.
and contradictory even in this case. So I'd be curious to see the actual case.
Well,
that you're describing.
I guess what I would say is sometimes women have feelings about religion at 22, and at 42 they change, and there's no consequence for women leaving right now.
People could change their minds at any given time.
Correct, but in fact they're paid to do so, and so I will never shame men for making a decision that's right for them.
This conversation is also super depressing because we are witnessing the breakdown and failure of the right in real time. Michael Knowles is like, men should vote conservative because it's virtuous. And then Pearl is like, men shouldn't vote at all because you don't have the power or interest in enforcing laws that actually serve male interests. There's no compelling reason for men generally to support a party that may or may not be interested in advancing their interests, but then also totally doesn't have the means to even do so in the first place.
But you're going further than not shaming them. I think we've gotten to the point where you've said it's at least a good strategy to walk away from the institution of marriage until the laws have changed. You just said that.
I say, do whatever you want, guys. But no,
said to me.
I said, regardless of what I say, men will walk away.
So let's establish men won't listen to Pearl, as you just said. Let's establish that you think men ought to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
We've long established. You also just said it is a good strategy for men to walk away from the institution of marriage until the laws change. You just said that.
No, I was talking about the vote.
They should walk away from the
voting,
the ballot box.
That was the ballot box.
Until I said. So at the very least, we've.
I said that's a strategy that men can do.
A good strategy,
but
not just a bad strategy.
I mean, how else? I mean, what have conservatives succeeded in conserving the last 50 years?
Not so much as the women's bathroom, I guess.
but so you're asking them to get on a team that's losing.
Right. I mean, that's what Whittaker Chambers said when he left being a communist to become a conservative.
Right.
He thought he was joining the losing team. And maybe that's the case. I mean, in the long run, we're all dead, and the world's going to fall to pot, and then the second coming will occur. But that's not an excuse to avoid doing what is just and good and right and in line with our natural desires.
But it's not.
This doesn't even have to be the case necessarily either. Like, it's something that's written in stone beforehand. You know, this is totally a preventable situation, but the right is just going to fail to inspire men and actually collectively bargain on behalf of their self-interest. And this is just an excuse that Michael Knowles is throwing out there. If someone asks the question, why should we get on a losing team? And your response is, because it's the correct thing according to my worldview, how many people do you think are going to respond to that? Is that an inspiring message? Absolutely not.
Unjust for men to not want to have children.
It's disordered. It's disordered for men not to.
We have priests.
Yeah. Clerical life. Some are called by the charism of celibacy, but for most men, and by the way, they're called to the charism of celibacy in the priesthood because the priests act in the person of Christ, who is the bridegroom of the church. But for people who are not following a religious vocation, they are called to family life.
Okay, if there are not enough wives, what are men supposed to do?
It's about 50-50 in the population.
If there are not enough wives, what are men supposed to do?
Your average woman in America is not qualified to be a wife and mother, and Michael Knowles has no response to this. Women are more left-leaning, that's indisputable, and your average woman is probably more promiscuous than your average man at this point. And for a lot of men, it's not even a matter of whether or not they want a wife. They can't even get laid in the first place.
There is basically parity between men and women, so there are enough wives.
Okay. Well, then I'm sure you'll see a spike in the men signing up.
No,
for marriage.
I agree that there's a great deal of selfishness and liberalism, but I think that's the view that you are articulating, and the view of the red pill people is basically a view that presumes a liberal, secular, individualist anthropology that is contrary to natural reason and the flourishing of men.
I will say that the red pill can be atheistic and Randian in a lot of ways that I don't like, but you can't pretend it's not an expression of male interests when, again, 50% of marriages end in divorce. How is getting married contributing to male flourishing in any way when there's a 50% chance it ends in disaster? And going, oh, actually we fact-checked this and it might be lower, isn't really all that helpful if your answer is that like 46 or 35% of marriages end in divorce, because that's still way too high. If that's even true either, because admittedly this is a tough thing to measure.
No, I would disagree with that.
How am I wrong? You're saying men ought to just pursue their own interests regardless of, say,
I think
nature.
when you have a smoking gun, I mean, that's essentially what it is. Like, I tell you these stories and you just say, sign up anyways.
I'm saying be prudent, but I'm saying be prudent in everything in life. You could get in a car and get in a car accident because of the other day, a teenage girl driver, another girl hit me while I was driving. But I'm not saying don't get in a car. I'm saying
but if I get into a car and I see 30% of people crashing, I'm not getting into that car, regardless of the 10% of people that succeed.
But then even further, to use your airplane analogy, I guess the difference is getting on an airplane and going to Hawaii would be a nice thing to do, and I might like to do it sometime. Getting married and having children is not merely a nice thing to do that I might, in my subjective preferences, like to engage in, but it is an aspect of my nature. It is an aspect of my purpose to which I am aimed.
He's not going to get anywhere trying to wave this Christo-Platonist philosophical claptrap in men's faces. This is just not a compelling reason to get married. Men don't want to not get married because their preferences are disordered. They don't want to get married because the institution of marriage in America isn't even reflective of the biblical definition of what marriage is. In the Bible, the power of divorce was overwhelmingly concentrated in the hands of the husband, and every wife was expected to be a virgin when she got married. Like, a lot of Christians are under this misconception that the Bible treats men and women's sexualities in like an equal and identical way, which just isn't the case. A woman's virginity is supposed to be an asset that belongs to her father until a qualified, suitable man comes along who can pay a dowry and then become her husband. There's really not even a whole lot of incentive for a woman to remain a virgin until marriage unless the dowry is brought back. And if you're one of those idiots who think that Old Testament law is totally irrelevant, then I'll just point out that we don't have a biblical definition of marriage in this country today, and we're reaping the consequences. So basically what you have in America today is like a concubine who can divorce you at will and take half of your stuff. She could be this jaded, tattooed loser, this strong, independent woman, and she could just take half of your stuff and your kids, totally of her own initiative, and there's nothing that you can do about it as a man.
That's the difference. That's why I say.
Do you think men's masculinity comes from marriage?
I think men's masculinity and virility comes from their nature as men.
Do you think? But you don't think it comes from marriage?
I think that marriage fulfills a man's purpose, and in as much as he is more a man, the more he fulfills his purpose.
You think marriage is a man's purpose?
I think that man's ultimate purpose is to know God and to serve Him in this world and enjoy Him forever in eternity.
Okay. It wouldn't be.
But
marriage?
subsidiary aspects of that would be for lay people, for instance, to get married, which is a symbol of Christ's love for His church, and to. But even taking religion
but I'm
aside
asking,
for a second,
can I get a yes or no? Do you think?
Well,
it's
I'm trying to explain to you the answer to the question you're asking.
Mm-hmm.
To anyone who doesn't think exactly like Michael Knowles does, this is just a bunch of unhelpful ideological word vomit.
But if you say, what's a man's purpose? And my purpose in this conversation is to talk to you.
Okay.
That's one purpose. A purpose is also to get to the nature of this question of marriage.
Okay.
Another purpose is to communicate that to the audience. So there are all sorts of purposes that we have. We have higher purposes and lower purposes. And so when you ask, is marriage part of a man's purpose? I say it is. It's not man's ultimate purpose, but it is a symbol of his ultimate purpose, and it is a constituent part of his purpose and a natural end of his very nature.
Okay. Yeah.
But the reason I say that you are adopting what seems to me a liberal and individualist anthropology here is because you are saying every man needs to make his own decision. Nothing's better or worse. I'm not recommending anything. I'm just, you do
you. Think every man should make the same decision?
In many matters, yes. Not between chocolate and vanilla ice cream, but between
Do you feel like you should tell men what to do?
In as much as I correctly perceive the moral order, yes.
Okay. So you think that you know what's right for every man?
I think that I can. I have a relatively reliable. If you'd like me to answer,
go ahead.
I think I have a relatively reliable faculty of reason and moral conscience, and so in as much as it is reliable, I can articulate the truth as I see it, which is all anyone does. It's what you're doing. It's what all people do when we speak.
Yeah, I don't think it's really our job as commentators to tell people what to do.
But it's our job as human beings to perceive the moral order.
High-income white person virtue signaling on Michael Knowles' part. Also, Paul did tell men not to get married in times of stress or political upheaval unless it was absolutely necessary as a way of avoiding sexual immorality.
Okay.
Right? And to form judgments about that.
Well, I disagree when you say it's the equivalent of feminism, because I'm saying
it's the equivalent of
right?
what you're articulating is a liberal and individualist view, and therefore it's similar to feminism.
I would say that right now marriage is a feminist institution.
Not mine.
Right? Well, if your wife decides tomorrow she wants to leave you, it will be.
The divorce laws are informed by feminism.
Correct. And so,
but marriage is
regardless,
marriage is a natural institution that predates the states that currently.
Right, but there's
Again, we see here that Michael cannot separate his ideal of what marriage should be from the reality of what it is.
no way for you to get married in this country and have children and not be a part of the institution of marriage legally.
Yeah, you have to
Because
sign
correct-
up for the
correct-
marital.
correct.
Though you can mitigate risk even by
so
state.
there's a whole business of lawyers making money off of marriage, of feminist women's shelters making money off of marriage, and you're saying, sign up anyway. And I think I would disagree that it's feminist, because what you're saying is sign up for the institution that is run by feminists.
Well, I guess you're putting those words in my mouth, sign up anyway. What I am saying is men ought to do the right thing. That at the basis of the natural law is one precept.
Natural law is an unbiblical concept. Sorry, I'm just too Protestant for this conversation. It is never mentioned in the Bible. It comes from Greek philosophy.
Which is do good and avoid evil.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that we apprehend is being, right? Is
Okay.
existence. The next thing that we apprehend, and this is the first thing we apprehend through our practical reason, which is oriented toward action, is good. Doing good. When you do something, you want to do good and you want to avoid evil. And so what I'm saying is that marriage and family, the end of marriage being the begetting and education of children, and secondarily the mutual support of the spouses, is good for man. So I'm not saying this isn't Michael's crazy view. I'm saying this is a natural part. It's why this has existed throughout all of human society everywhere, and it's why we are all inclined to do it, whether or not Pearl or Michael wants it.
Okay, so
A lot of this conversation just seems to be Michael talking past Pearl without any real promises of, okay, this is how we're going to fix it so it's beneficial for a man to even get married.
do you think it's wrong if a man wants to build a business? And
Depends what the business is.
He doesn't. Okay, but whatever. And instead of pursuing women, he pursues his business. Instead of pursuing a marriage and a family.
I think it would be a mistake for a man to pursue material good to the exclusion of better goods.
Okay, what about coaching? What about teaching? Like, why?
I think our jobs in the commercial economy are good things, but I think modern liberalism and individual anthropologies make an idol out of that, and that is to the harm of men. We shouldn't make an idol out of our jobs. I like my job a lot, but it's not my whole life.
And the other problem you get into is, again, just because a man has kids, it doesn't mean that the kids will. I mean, you have men raising kids that grow up to hate them. I mean, even in the story that I showed
bad.
you.
Yeah, it's bad. Within marriage or divorce, you mean?
Both.
Yeah, both.
I've seen kids get alienated from their fathers.
How?
That are in the same household. It happens all the time.
How does it happen, though? I agree, it happens.
Well, I mean, the man's working, and so the mom spends more time with the kids. The mom's talking all day in the kid's ear. It's a really sad thing.
So you're saying the mom hates the dad?
Yeah.
That seems to be a problem that predates the alienation.
No, it totally is.
It
totally is. And
and the schools and the TV, and everyone says the men are dolts and idiots. Yeah, I agree. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Michael's just going, oh yeah, I agree. I totally agree with all that. The issue is that tradcons are not providing men with ways to deal with these situations. Like, Michael Knowles is not an example of strong male leadership. Neither is Matt Walsh, neither is Ben Shapiro, neither is Andrew Klavan. Just look at Michael Knowles' watch. How much do you think that watch costs? Do you think he's in touch with your average man? Do you think he knows what it's like to be poor, to be out here dealing with regular people? Anyone who's got an affinity for watches, if you're still part of this video this far along, can you tell me what kind of watch Michael Knowles is wearing and how expensive it is in the comments? I'd really like to know. I'd like to know whether or not he's in touch with your average man.
Yeah, but that's my point, is just because a man has kids, it doesn't mean his legacy will live on.
No, again, I don't think the kids are the chief end of man in the world, but I do think it is an important aspect of it and an expression of it. And you can raise kids who are likely not to hate you. There are things that you can do and things that you can avoid that will increase that likelihood.
I mean, that's true, but there's no guarantees, and I think
no guarantees of anything in this life.
And I think it's a higher risk, and I think I would really encourage you to spend a couple days in family court. I think it would really
Yeah, I mean,
change your point
I've
of
had
view.
close friends who have been in brutal divorces. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
a little bit of it up close. It's dreadful.
Yeah, and at times, they didn't really do anything wrong.
Yeah,
Because
they've all
women-
done something.
If women feel like leaving, they can leave. We can leave.
They can. But how does the marriage break down? It's like Hemingway describes bankruptcy in The Sun Also Rises. Happens gradually and then suddenly.
A lot of tradcons, in the same manner as feminists, are allergic to holding women accountable on any issue at any time. Like, his first response was just deflection. Oh, men are at fault too, though. Like, way to just totally not address anything here at all.
So it seems to me, I'm not letting women off the hook. Sometimes crazy, feminist ladies go nuts and divorce their husbands and poison, the kids against their father, and they do all sorts of terrible things. But marriage is a union of two people, and I agree with you. A lot of people, when they get into marriage these days, including the men, especially the men, not only don't know what they're signing up for, they don't even really have a vision of what they're signing up for. They don't even know what they want to be signing up for.
Correct.
And so that's a mistake. That's an error on the part of the men often and of the women. But the men are the head of the household, so more responsibility falls onto them. And then the way they lead their lives, I would say.
But do they get authority too?
Who do they give authority to?
No, do the men have authority in their own households?
In the good marriages, they do.
Yeah, and the government and media actively disincentivize good marriage. So no, most men don't have the authority they should have. He's also got to totally diminish this too. Like, the only women who are getting divorced and turning the kids against their husbands or former husbands are like crazy feminist ladies, when that's not the case. Like, your average woman is way closer to being a crazy feminist lady than Michael Knowles or most tradcons care to admit. Women are morally worse off as a group than men are. That's not to say that men are perfect or aren't struggling with problems. We're all struggling with problems. But women are unequivocally worse off, less moral. Michael Knowles can't take off the rose-colored tradcon glasses here. The cult of perfect femininity. Other cultures like Eastern, Asian, Chinese culture does not have this same problem of seeing women as these perpetually innocent and irresponsible moral actors.
I'm having a little trouble following. You're saying because
you guys always attribute if a man's happy, it's because of his marriage.
I'm just saying married people are
Okay,
in as much as one can measure happiness, married people seem to be significantly happier than unmarried people.
Okay.
But again,
men will sign right up.
But I don't. I think people do things that are extremely perverse today because of largely because of individualism and liberalism. But even that word happiness is important because we say we can't measure happiness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that we can define happiness now.
Okay.
What do we even mean by happiness?
Mm-hmm.
I have a definition that I go by, but
Okay.
what do you mean by it?
I guess I couldn't say a definition off the top of my head. I see what you mean.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
so many people mean so many different things by it. I always go by good old Uncle Aristotle's definition of happiness as eudaimonia, which is rational activity conducted in accordance with virtue.
I am so tired of this Greek philosophy nonsense. Joy is a gift from the Holy Spirit when a person acts in accordance with God's will. Quit referencing Aristotle, no one cares.
And so the reason I mention this is not just because I love, the old dead thinkers, but because I think they had something right that will help to guide us through this very confused modern time. The way that you are describing marriage
Mm-hmm.
seems to be from an unmoored perspective of
And on what?
unmoored, meaning
I don't
not
know what that
grounded
means.
in something. Meaning it's a little subjective. It's a little wishy-washy. Men can do whatever they like. You pick.
not
Some
what I
people have a
said.
different purpose.
That's not what I said.
I thought you said men can do whatever they like. I'm not going to I thought you took issue with me for saying that I was coming to a moral judgment about how men.
No, I think that every man has to decide for himself. But I wouldn't recommend, say, like,
How should he decide?
Again, what are Paul's teachings regarding marriage in a time of crisis? not all that favorable.
Following, in an ideal world, following God and his purpose.
Right. So following God and and how do we come to know our purpose?
I mean, I think following God typically meant finding.
How do we follow God?
Going to church every Sunday, praying. I think there's ways that you can't, studying the Bible. But I'm not like a preacher.
You're not. The thing you keep leaving out. I agree. All those things are very good to do.
Yeah.
The thing you keep leaving out is reason, and it's the thing you keep taking issue with me, where I keep saying marriage is a rational act.
It was. I don't know if it is now.
But even though the laws are bad and the politicians are dummies, even still, it's a rational act. Over and above the qualities of the state.
No, it's not a rational action when 50% of marriages end in divorce and the quote-unquote marriage sanctioned by the American government really does not resemble at all the biblical definition of marriage. Anyway, Michael Knowles did not learn his lesson in this conversation. This video is already 40 minutes long, so I'm going to cut it off here. If you want me to review more, just tell me in the comments and I'll do it. But tradcons, unfortunately, are not adaptive enough to understand the problems that men are confronted with and then check reality against their own understanding of how a human being ought to behave. Because they're just so steeped in this one particular tradition that they're basically incapable of giving good or relevant advice to your average man. And of course, the manosphere is going to fill that void, to give men the advice and answers that they need. And I don't think that the manosphere is perfect. Like, things are going to get really, really, really ugly in the near future. Like, you already see people online talking about sex robots replacing actual human women. I think that's a disgrace. I think it's an awful idea. But it will gain traction in the manosphere, in the red pill, as time moves on and as relations between the sexes worsen. And tradcons are unfortunately not equipped to deal with this situation. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it if you really liked it. That's the #1 way you can support this channel, and Red Channels will catch you in the next one.